Welcome to the Stoa. The Stoa is a digital campfire where we cohere and dialogue about what matters most at the knife's edge of what's happening now. Welcome to the Stoa. I'm Peter Lindbergh, the steward of the Stoa. The Stoa is a place for us to cohere and dialogue about what matters most at the knife's edge of this moment. And today we have the Human Systems team joining us, Joe Edelman and Jessica Watson-Miller. For those of you who don't know who or what the Human Systems is, it's a research network for innovation in human systems. And they look at human systems, new human systems, which better support participants' agency and life meanings. And I took the Human Systems course, and it was really awesome. Joe and the team have done an excellent job there, kind of giving the download of their system. And so Joe texted me, he sent me a voicemail, says, dude, I don't know if he said dude, but that's my memory. It says, dude, I got this idea, the Social Design Club. It's a club where people come in with their social designs, and then we kind of like test them, stress test them, talk about them, and all that type of stuff. So I'm like, Joe, whatever you want, Joe gets. And so we started this. And then so this is going to be weekly, or the idea is going to be a weekly online event where someone presents a social design system and then gets their feedback. And I don't know how today's going to go, so I'm going to stop talking, and I'm going to take in Jess and Joe in to introduce today's session.
All right, cool. Thank you so much, Peter, and thanks for answering weird voicemails with a yes. So first of all, welcome everybody. It's really exciting to see so many people who are excited about being part of Social Design Club for the inaugural session. Just to give you guys a sense of what we're hoping for here, the social design, or at least the way that I think about social design, other people think about social design, is kind of its own distinct field that's different from UX design or graphic design or other aspects of design, in that it's really dealing with the relationships between people and the relationships between communities and how the design you create shapes those. And the hope is that we can kind of create a community of practice here where we can really improve our own designs and our own kind of skills in thinking about design, both through the human systems lens with the frameworks that human systems offers, but also just with people's own design knowledge. So this is the very first one, and we're very lucky to have Malcolm Ocean here as our guest presenter. But we're hoping to do a lot more of these. And if you have a design that you're interested in getting feedback on or presenting in front of the Social Design Club, then we would love you to contact us with that, because we want to create a really thriving feedback and ideas and critique kind of community here. So Malcolm Ocean, I'll introduce him briefly. I've known him for several years, and he's probably the person who I've spent the most time talking to in proportion to how much time I've spent talking to him in person. We have collaborated on a lot of things over the internet, and he has built for the last several years a system called Compass, which is a productivity system that's aiming at helping you focus on what matters to you and your goals in the everyday. And so what we're going to do is he's going to quickly present a bit about Compass, and then a feature that he's working on or workshopping. And then we're going to get a chance to really dive into some breakout rooms and give him some ideas and thoughts and everything, and some feedback. So I don't know, Joe, if there's anything you wanted to add before we jump in with Malcolm.
Yeah, I'll just say that I think this is a really important community of practice to build. And I'm a little embarrassed that I wasn't part of building something like this earlier, because I've been complaining about social networks, social apps. I've started like nonprofits that are about complaining about social networks, and more recently complaining about our systems for voting, the last week's policing. We have really bad social designs that are causing all sorts of problems at many different levels of society, and yet there's not very much of a community that's focused on getting better at this. And I think we really need it right now. And so that's super exciting for me to like, I think this group could become a very powerful thing.
So I guess we can kick off with Malcolm. He's just going to explain a little bit about Accomplice. And then afterwards, we're going to jump into a Q&A. And so if you have questions that come up either while he's speaking or while we're asking some questions, then pop them in the chat and we will we'll take those questions. But yeah, Malcolm, do you want to unmute yourself?
Yeah. Hey, can everybody hear me? Cool. All right. So yeah, I'm Malcolm Ocean. I created a system a number of years ago called Accomplice, and I'll give kind of a brief overview demo of kind of the system as a whole, and then I'll talk about a feature that I started working on a few years ago and never launched, and I was thinking it would be a cool thing to present at Social Design Club. So let's see, share screen. Oh, I need screen sharing abilities. So yeah, so basically, Accomplice kind of looks a lot like a to-do list app, but it's kind of inside out compared to an ordinary to-do list app. Like most to-do list apps are like, dump in all of your things, organize them, that kind of thing. Accomplice instead starts with, what am I actually trying to achieve in the world? And then each day you kind of focus on that. And so, so I'll just sort of show you the kind of the basic structure of the UI. You have a list of kind of active goals that you're working on. And there's at most 10 active goals at any given time. You know, I also have a huge list of, you know, previous goals that I used to have and like, you know, completed goals and that kind of thing. But you have this list of active goals. And when I'm talking about a goal here, it's like, I'm not talking about necessarily a SMART goal, you know, S-I-M-A-R-T, where you have like metrics and targets and, you know, precise deadlines and all of that. It's really more like your why. Like, why am I doing what I'm doing? What purpose am I moving towards personally? And so then the main page of Accomplice is the Today page where, oh my, that's not good at all. Hang on a sec. I just made some changes just before this. And so I'm just going to roll back to before those changes and that'll be fine. We're doing it live, folks. All right, so anyway, oh, that's even weirder. Okay, well, this version of the page loaded fine. So anyway, we're just gonna roll with that. So basically, you have this list of kind of like what you're working on for the day with your goals kind of down here. And you can see how each of the items in this list is colorized by the goal that it's oriented towards, right? So, you know, I've got my, I was preparing for this event and that was, you know, primarily under my design goal. So I have, you know, so it's sort of showing up in the kind of indigo blue of the design goal. So I'm going to check that off because I've done my prep at this point, and now I'm presenting. And it's really, Accomplice is much more oriented around workflows than a lot of sort of to-do list manager apps. So it's like you go into next action mode, and then it's just like, well, here's just the one thing I'm doing right now. And then, so after setting your intentions for the day, you know, you do things, you have a Pomodoro timer. At the end of the day, you submit your outcomes and you reflect on like, how is what I did towards each of these goals? How does that connect with the goal? You know, was I in touch with the goal? Was I out of touch, et cetera? And there's a few different versions of questions here. That's actually something else I've been designing, but not what we're going to talk about today. So then, of course, you have a history. You know, you can look back over what you've done in the course of you know, the past days and weeks. And then there's also kind of reviews where you can reflect on you know, here's how the whole week went, you know, and you ask yourself certain questions. So that's kind of a high level overview of the app itself. And so a couple of years ago, I started thinking, well, okay, so it's like, I've got my personal goals, but how do I want to relate to the idea that like some of my goals are just about my own life, but other goals that I have are about changing things, you know, in the world. So like, you know, maybe I have a goal that's about, you know, the environment, or maybe I have a goal that's about helping people in the world be better at a particular skill or something like that. Well, that's actually something that multiple people are trying to achieve. Like, I'm not the only one trying to care for the environment. I'm not the only person trying to, you know, reduce the chances of there being global catastrophic risks. You know, there are a lot of people out there right now who in many different ways are trying to mitigate the impacts of COVID, right? So, so that was when I created the shared purposes feature. And the basic idea with the shared purposes feature is you have something out there that multiple people care about. And these are mostly just some examples I whipped up a while ago. But if we'll just take this one as an example. So basically, you know, there's multiple people who have been talking about meta-systematicity or meta-rationality or fluid mode or so on. So this page then highlights kind of, you know, there's this shared purpose that people have of trying to convey to people, how would we operate in fluid mode? And so I can point this design goal that I have towards that. And then it sort of shows, you know, here's what I'm working on, you know, today, for instance. And this box right here, I'm realizing I may be going like a little fast or something. Oh, just take a breath. So I was really trying, like, I want to take a step back and just say, like, the image I had in mind when I was thinking about this was almost like somebody like kind of plants a flag around an idea and says like, hey, this thing is important. Like, you know, what if we focused on this? And other people recognize like, hey, I'm also sort of focused on this. So there's a kind of like coming into connection with people who are already, with people who are also oriented towards some shared purpose. And my thinking with this was, you know, there's a lot of, you know, productivity apps and whatnot that are like designed for like teams to coordinate towards like shared, like, you know, towards their company mission or that kind of thing. But a lot of them have implicitly a kind of top-downness. There's the thing in the middle is we're a company and you know, somebody's making decisions about what needs to be done, and then we're kind of all doing it. And I said, what does it look like to just, like, thinking about maybe Donella Meadows' leverage points and the leverage point that like information flow is, which is I think number 5. It's like, what difference does it make to see other people working on projects that are trying to move the same needles in the world as you? Like, how can that be both motivating or inspiring or create the context where people might come into relationship with each other and possibly collaborate on different projects that might be related there, or be able to share other information like, oh, you're working on this, well, check out this article that might help you out. So those are the kinds of like interactions that I was imagining happening from this. I don't think that the feature is at all at this point sort of capable of creating most of those interactions, aside from just seeing other people working on the thing together. And I'll show you what it looks like when you go to, you click a button, point a goal towards this purpose. So I'm going to say actually that, you know, I have a goal called systems thinking, which is mostly about learning systems thinking, but also about modeling systems and so forth. And I'm going to say, yeah, this goal actually is quite relevant to, you know, meta-systematicity curriculum, because systems thinking seems like a fairly established discipline that has a lot of resonance with meta-systematicity. And so this is kind of like a description of like how is systems thinking related to meta-systematicity. So you get to kind of write in there something that links your goal with this larger purpose. And then what's cool is, depending on your sense of like privacy of the goal, you can actually click each of these items. So this line here is the description of my systems thinking goal. if that contained like private information, I could hide that so it doesn't actually get shared as part of this purpose. Or I could say, actually, I don't want people to see what I'm working on. I just want them to see that I'm connected with this purpose. Like what I'm working on contains confidential information, but they can see that I'm working on it. So then I could hide these by clicking on them. It also might be that under some circumstances that it makes sense to, you know, edit the name of the goal, because the goal might be named for me, and I might want a different name for other people to see in relation to that. So I do all of those, and then I just hit save, and now systems thinking is kind of added to this pile of goals that are all pointed at the meta-systematicity curriculum. That is basically what exists so far, but I think in the context of the Social Design Club, it also makes sense to show you the settings page to give you just a little bit of a sense of how I've been thinking about that. Which is basically, currently there's, you know, just sort of a name and a description and so forth. And then there is visibility. So is this, you know, listed and discoverable, or is it, you know, unlisted, like, but you can find it via URL or private, kind of pretty typical 3 categories that YouTube has as well. And then there's also like joinability, has either anybody or invite only or request, as in like, this purpose is like kind of my project, right? Like, so I'm not like, you can't just say, hey, I'm also working on this project with you, but you can say, hey, I'd like to work on this project with you. And so that way there can be kind of more of a membrane around who's working on a particular purpose. So that's the shared purposes thing. That's kind of all that exists so far. I think it needs a little bit more in order for it to be able to really be the thing that it wants to be. And that's why it didn't take off when I tried presenting it to a group of effective altruists back in 2017. Yeah, but I think it has a powerful chance to potentially be a cool thing at present, you know, even just like related to like COVID, or related to, you know, the kinds of shared projects that people seem in some ways more oriented to with the whole meta crisis and everything.
Cool.
So yeah.
So I would invite people at this point to notice things that you are curious about, or maybe didn't want to learn more about. If there's anything in this that you kind of want to, would like Malcolm to kind of explain a bit more, and pop those questions in the chat. And Joe, I don't know if you have any questions you want to start off with?
Sure. Yeah, I think it's a beautiful idea. I remember Justin Rosenstein, one of the founders of Asana, once told me that this was kind of like his big dream goal of Asana, was to deaggregate the projects and goals and let people form cross organization goals like this. But I guess he hasn't gotten around to it yet.
Yeah, he made a thing called One Project or something that was trying to frame all of what humanity was doing as one giant project. And I really like that frame. I saw a talk that he gave on that at Burning Man. And I think I saw that talk actually just like a week or 2 after I'd been designing this. So it was kind of a convergent thing.
Cool. Yeah, I'll definitely send him the link to this recording. So I'm interested in, so when I look at this, I think about different kinds of collaboration values towards these kinds of beautiful meta goals that I have. One of them is that I like to encourage people to be like ambitious, to reach for things, try ways to help out on a scale that they might not think of before. So discoverability of these shared purposes is kind of like relevant there, right? Like, how would I start to become part of a shared purpose that I didn't know about before? Another thing is about getting real. I think a lot of people isolate themselves and work alone on their project. Like they have, their little, idea about reinventing group process or something, but they don't work with other people because they're not really willing to do the kind of hard work of making things concrete that would be required to actually coordinate in a group. And so I wonder about what kinds of design features would actually be necessary to support these kinds of things. I don't know if you have anything to say to that. That's quite.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things that has a bit of like a kind of chicken egg quality to it. It's like, I love to imagine what this page would look like if like this feature was being used by thousands of people. I mean, I think one thing is that it would become unwieldy in its current form. Like you'd need a search feature, you need a filter feature, and you need like, you know, stuff like that, right? So there's that. But leaving that aside, it's like, what kinds of things would we be seeing here? And what kind of, I've been thinking recently, so I keep trying out sticking new words in front of design and seeing what happens. And the main one I've been doing lately is metaphor design. And that's been a super powerful intuition pump for me, like really great. A different thing I've been thinking about is like something like situation design. So it's like when somebody's looking at this list, what situation are they in? You know, one metaphor that we might use for that is like a university clubs fair. Like, you know, during the first week of university, there's a bunch of clubs, right? And they're kind of recruiting, right? So like, and to some extent, you know, they're just recruiting random people, but to also some extent, you know, the a cappella club wants singers, right? They want people who want to sing, right? So there's a kind of like, they're not just trying to recruit anybody. They're trying to recruit, you know, people who already have a resonance with that. So it's like, you could think of this as kind of like a clubs fair, or you could think of it as kind of like a conference like EA Global, where a bunch of people come together and they say, you know, I'm working on this project and I think it's really important and here's what I'm doing about it. And somebody else says, I'm working on this project and I think it's really important and here's what I'm doing about it. And, you know, other people who aren't actively working on projects kind of go to these talks and find out like why these things are important. So even just saying that right now, it's like I hadn't thought of that in advance, but saying that right now gets me thinking about like, oh, you know, where in here might people write about like why they think this thing is important, for instance, right? Like that's a thing that could be added, right? And so it's like, okay, you know, there could be like, there could be both like, how does this particular goal of mine relate to this? And there's one thing I really like about this, which is that you can't join, you don't join a purpose as yourself. You join it with one of your goals. So there's no way to just be in the fan club of a purpose. Like there's no way to just be like, yeah, I care about that. You have to say, I'm working on that with this goal. Like, and that's something that I find really delightful. Like there's no, like, you know, there are things I care about like globally, but I don't have any particular goals that I'm working on towards them. And it's like, okay, you know, and maybe there could be another relationship that's something like, you know, fan or subscribe or, you know, something like that, where it's like, I'm curious what people are doing towards this. I want to be abreast of it, but I'm not like, I'm in a totally different category than people who are like, I'm actively working on this every day.
So I've got a question around the, I think someone mentioned something about ontology, but I'm basically the distinction of the shared purposes and how a shared purpose might be collectively understood. Maybe a concrete way of saying it is, if you name something like climate change and I name something climate change, it's entirely possible and probably likely that we have very different idea of what that is. So what, I guess maybe like what, can you say a bit more about like how this addresses that, or how it might, even if it's—
Yeah, so in as much as I've thought about that, the thought that I had basically went something like, you know, in the same way that people find themselves into, like you know, there's a lot of different climate change oriented groups on Facebook, say. And so it's like, what causes you to be in one versus in another? And the answer to that might be something like, you know, who else is in it? What kinds of conversations do they have? Like how do they talk about this topic? How do they apparently understand it? And sort of who are the moderators of it, right? And so I was kind of thinking about like there's currently a thing where, can I do an example of this? Maybe if I go to, I don't know, maybe this one. Nope, okay, never mind. There's a thing where it's like, if you view a purpose that was created by somebody else rather than you, then instead of seeing settings in the top right here, you see something like purpose holder and then like the name of the person holding it. So there's a sense in which like I was trying to sort of as an initial stab at it to just try to say, okay, whose vision of this purpose, like whose articulation of what we're trying to do here do I resonate with? And the idea that there could be multiple different versions. And I think that, yeah, this is another thing that could become quite unwieldy at scale, and another situation where it might make sense to have something like, you know, a list over here. I don't know if you guys can sort of see my mouse, but over here on the left or something. Actually, can you see my mouse? Yeah, okay, cool. So a list somewhere over here that kind of, you know, says something like related purposes or something like that, right? So people could kind of like, you know, these purposes could kind of connect with each other themselves. But yeah, no, the whole thing is an ontological nightmare, of course, because like purposes and goals and so on are not perfectly hierarchical. You know, I might have a goal, half of which is totally related to this purpose and half of which is totally related to something else. And it's currently pretty hard to kind of easily connect that here. So that's a design question that I'm sitting with. Like when I launched this with the effective altruist, one of them said, well, I've got this goal that like half of it goes to EA coordination, but half of it is also related to this other thing, which isn't, you know, so I don't know, you know, do I link the goal or not? Like, how do I think about that? And that's something I don't have a good answer for. So that's, I mean, that's another thing we could talk about today. But I currently have that under questions we're probably not asking, because it's like, there's not necessarily a straightforward answer to that, given that it's an ontological problem.
Jess, should I ask some more questions? Yeah.
I think maybe like one more or something, and then we'll have to move on.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So I'm gonna actually maybe don't answer them, Malcolm. I'm gonna ask some questions that then in our breakout rooms we can kind of like maybe make some progress towards. So I noticed that in your design there's no sense of really being together with the people that are in your shared purpose, right? There's no presence, even though you have this Pomodoro working room kind of thing, that it does have a sense of being together. And there's not really a way of vetting people except by maybe sharing the link or not. For me, you know, hiring someone is like a way of trying to create a shared purpose. And see how someone can do in a shared purpose, and see if you can really divide up work within a shared purpose. And this is, for me, very difficult. Like I've often made hires that later I was like, oh gosh, this isn't working out or whatever. And so there's this whole space in between just like working randomly under the same shared purpose and like deciding that you're a team, which is kind of, I don't know, ignored in your design so far. Another area is feedback. If I'm making progress towards the goal, something that's kind of missing is whether other people are kind of like noticing, chiming in, cheering me on, whether people respect what my sub goal is as part of the, you know, are people like if I'm Elon Musk and I'm using Accomplice and I'm trying to work on climate change and I ship electric cars or whatever, probably other people are like, oh yeah, he's actually really helping. Or at least some of them are. But you know, if I'm somebody else, people might have a different opinion. So there's like some question about feedback. And I feel like there's a whole space of people finding each other that's maybe not explored between just sharing the link or making it public or whatever. Like the question about how would you actually want to find people that you would trust to be pursuing a shared purpose together. So I just said 4 things in like human systems terminology. I said time together, feedback, loyalty or trust, and matchmaking are kind of like challenges that I see here that might be worth exploring. And Jess, do you want to say what the plan is for the breakout rooms?
Yeah, so Joe is gonna kind of drop some very quick knowledge on a structure for the kind of discussions we're going to have in breakout rooms. But essentially what we're going to do is center our discussions around a couple of questions. And I think we're going to Joe, should we scope that to the questions we're asking today, or?
I think maybe, yeah, let me look at the doc again.
Yeah.
So there's questions we're asking today, and then there's these structural features that I put in, which include, I will highlight the ones that I just asked about.
I just jotted them down.
Mm.
Okay, but they're also kind of, they're in the doc, like one of them is there.
Cool, yeah.
Yeah, so we'll highlight those. And so maybe we suggest that in your breakout room, you discuss one of these questions, either under questions we're asking today or structural features that might be relevant. So you can just pick in your group.
Yeah, and so then what we're gonna do is we'll in that breakout room, we'll discuss those things, and I invite you to get at least one person to be writing down thoughts or responses that come up from your breakout group in the section that's called Breakout Groups. And then we're going to join back in about 10 minutes, and we're going to have kind of a more free-form discussion about that, and present kind of any thoughts or feedback to Malcolm that arose. So Joe, do you want to explain the turtles rule?
Yeah, so this is just a way to have, if you're in a breakout room with like close friends, don't bother to do this, but unless you kind of don't trust them. But if you're in a breakout room with strangers, a good way to organize the discussion is to talk in a funny way that I'll demonstrate right now. So if people have a question, they can make a turtley gesture like I am if you look at my screen. So this is like a kind of a swimming tortoise or something. So if you have a question like a curiosity, you make this shape. If you have an idea, you make this shape. This is like a rabbit. Yeah. If you have a clarifying question or something that's like just a point of order, like we only have 30 seconds left or something, you make a kind of a fungus rhizome, kind of like little dance with your fingers. So there's these three ways that you kind of like gesture as starting your contribution. And the deal is that the turtles rule. So like if you make this, the people who make the turtle thing, the ideas are in surface to them. So this keeps us from just like shouting out our ideas and keeps us kind of like focusing as a group on curiosity rather than like, oh, I have my idea. Oh, I have my idea. I have my idea. Because the turtles are in charge of the room.
So, and if you have any questions about that, you can, I think you should be able to chat back at us from in your breakout room. So if you're like, I'm lost or I don't understand, then chat at myself or Joe. So we're gonna start the breakout rooms now, and we'll be back in about 10 minutes.
It was good. Our group was good.
Okay, cool. Well, does someone in there want to give us a bit of wisdom about what you all talked about? As a question or something?
I'd be happy to.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Is everybody back in yet?
I think we're approaching most people being back.
Cool. Okay, so yeah, our group discussion was really rich for such a short discussion between people who didn't know each other. We explored a few different directions. The main one was we looked at we looked at how to divide up people who care about the same goal, like climate change or something like that, into different theories of change. So one idea was to separate, like have some discussion sections underneath the shared purpose, like the climate change shared purpose, with some like why discussion that we thought would be pretty easy, and then some how discussion that would be very, there would be a lot of disagreements. And we thought about how people in the how section could find people who have similar theories of change or shared context. So we talked about like, oh, maybe they could find people who agreed with the same podcasts or social theories, or yes, they could somehow like aggregate around like, not only am I working on climate change, but I follow this social theory or this view, Michael Schellenberger or whatever. Then we also looked at, so this started to create a kind of a funny mix of a social network that was about work and also a social network that was more about like different kinds of theories and ideological positions on that work, which I thought was quite beautiful. And then we also talked very briefly about a payments network, like a Patreon model, where you support other people who are working for the same goals.
Yeah, cool. Does someone from the Sarah, Malcolm, James, Nathan, Tanya group that's maybe not Malcolm want to just give like maybe one question you were asking that was particularly interesting, or one kind of consideration that you had that came up?
I think one question we were asking is, for all of the different features this would need to be like a whole organism, like does it want to have those inside it, or does it want to connect to something outside an interface that has those capabilities, I guess? Okay. Maybe someone else wants to add more.
Like concretely, like it could link to a Discord server, for instance, like, oh, we talk over here.
Okay, cool. I'm just kind of jumping through people because we have a short amount of time left, but the Phil, Dave, Bilal, Aviv, Ron group, does someone want to kind of also offer a reflection of maybe questions or something that you were curious about during that time?
Okay, so I guess one of the, well, we had a lot of interesting discussion and some questions. Some of the questions that popped up, I wish we had more time to discuss. Aviv mentioned this idea of like tools versus actions. Phil was talking about the what versus the how. And the thing that I remember discussing at the end was how a goal is kind of amorphous and could be really, really big, and how at the very, very bottom, there's just an individual with a single intention or goal that might match. And if there was a tiering process and maybe a goal holder, like the SDGs actually has people, I don't know what they're called exactly, but they're like goal owners, and they kind of own a goal and they try to make stuff happen around this particular thing. And it was just this idea of like, how is that tiering happening and how is that coordinating happening, where there's like very, very small actions and very, very huge. I'd say like maybe there's something called a vision, or like, is there any more levels that need to be created?
Okay, awesome. Maybe Benjamin, Nick, Elliot, and Starfish group, if you want to, if someone wants to offer something from your group, a question or a consideration.
Something that Starfish brought up that I thought was really interesting is that the Accomplice seems like it could help with like decentralized power in projects where people are working together, but that there are two sort of different ways that things can be decentralized. Either there can be a core community with no real leader, but everybody is like committed and working on the project, and the boundary is such that people don't just pop in and out. Or there can be a more open source style decentralized setup where people are just able to drop in and out as they please, and there's no centralized authority in that kind of nature. And I think most of our discussion just centered around how, depending on which kinds of purposes you had behind having shared purposes in the first place, you might use Accomplice in different ways.
Awesome. And also, if you guys have comments on the notes of any other group, feel free to add like a comment in Google Docs on there, and you can kind of continue that conversation. So if you have a response that we don't have necessarily enough time to respond to in person right now, yeah, you can add a comment directly on that group's reflection in the doc. So and
a 5-second rabbit thing.
Yeah.
Something that came up that I kind of thought would be interesting was when you have this kind of overarching goals, and people each put in their individual one, if there may be a slot where people could put in where there's gaps. Like I see this giant project coming about, and I see that there's a lot of people working on these different projects. I see that there's room for this project, but no one's called it out. Maybe kind of having an alert, and then that can match up with people who already have that written down as one of their own personal goals, or people who want to take on a new goal and they see this huge project, and I see a gap here.
Yeah, cool. Thanks. All right, Anne, Sebastian, Nicholas, and Robin, if someone from that group wants to offer a question or reflection.
This is the moment where we would all stare at each other if we could, to figure out who's gonna go. I'm gonna just do this until I get interrupted by someone. So I think one thing that I found really interesting was this, we took some time to kind of resolve whether this is about working on something together quite concretely, or about having a sense of like sharing the same forest with people you can't see because they walk in a different path of it, different part of it, and how that might influence how you would want to design around it, if it's more about like the sense of sharing something or the actual practicality of doing it together. Anything else?
Yeah, we also talked about kind of some of the main issues that might come up are similar to in other groups. Like how do you for the people who are in the group, who do they bring in at different times, and how do they know that, you know, what's the trust network built around? Is it built around shared goals? Is it built around, oh, I can see you've done actions about this already and I have, so we could probably work? Is it built around we're actually facing similar problems, we're in the same hometown? I think I think I forget who it was, but someone mentioned about, you know, living in Scotland and the issue of geothermal, like moving to a net zero. And if you are also facing, or if you're also curious and living in that same place and you could do something about that, maybe you could work together. So how could we offline this from online to offline? Like, how does that move? And then how do you have enough difference in your group that it's not just an echo chamber? We didn't really touch that one, but that's always going to be kind of an issue with any group that forms. And so yeah.
So we have a very short amount of time, so I'm going to pass to Joe to wrap up. Joe, if you want to.
Cool. Rad. I mean, I think we just sort of begun to dive into a huge design space that's really interesting, I think. Malcolm, maybe just with like a from all the way up to all the way down, do you feel like this was like helpful investigation?
I'm not sure I could summarize it like with an up or a down. It has helped me think about this a lot, but it's one of those situations where like you think you have like something that's like almost done, and then you like think about it more, and then you're like, oh my God, there's so much left to do. So I feel less close to done than when I came, but that's not because I have more like less information or something. Yeah, I feel like I got a lot out of this. I'd love if people like recorded their breakout groups, which I assume nobody did, but like I would love to just like listen to each of them and be like, what did people talk about? So I'm just sort of like thinking about that as part of the design of future iterations of Social Design Club or something like that. Because it's like, yeah, I'm looking at all these notes here and some of them are just like the tip of the iceberg of ideas that people have. And I'd love to dig in more. If you guys want to hit me up on Twitter, at Malcolm Ocean or at Malcolm_Ocean, and just like share more thoughts with me about this, you're welcome to do that. Or whatever other media you can get a hold of me through.
Yeah, I think I'm really interested in both this being the beginning of like an ongoing conversation with Malcolm, like opening a can of worms that we then kind of like all explore asynchronously, and we can continue to use the Google Doc as like a coordination point for that. And also
Cool,
I'm interested in iterating and help Jess and I do a better job next week. I'm not sure who we'll have, but I think Ed, who's here, will present sometime kind of soon. Nathan Schneider, there's a bunch of great people who are interested in presenting, many of them here, and I also see a bunch of great human systems people. And yeah, I'm excited about making this club work and work.
Before the very end, Joe, that you do, I just want to give everyone a chance to give us feedback because a bunch of people have had ideas about the actual event. So I'm just going to post a feedback form in the chat. Please help us out. This is the biggest gift you can give us right now, is feedback on the actual experience of being at the event. So yeah. one for you.
And the last thing that I want to say is just, I think that we have kind of a huge task ahead of us, not just to redesign Accomplice, but like all the other stuff. And I would like to try to scale in that direction. So if you think of a social design, not necessarily something that you're working on even, but something that's really frustrating for you, unemployment centers, the DMV, Facebook, voting in your town, whatever, and you think about who would be the ideal people to do that redesign with, and how can you bring them here, and how can we like make this thing grow in capacity so that we can help each other do this stuff. I think that's it. Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you everyone for coming. We do have a gift economy page if you feel called to give a gift to the store or the facilitators. But otherwise, as I said, the biggest gift is giving us feedback on this event and making it better, and coming back next week and telling the cool social designers that you want to be here. So thank you so much, everybody. It's been really great.
Cheers. Hmm.